Ladies and gentlemen, President Trump has just absolutely dropped the hammer on the single largest immigrant-based fraud ring in the entire country, a fraud ring that, by the way, has defrauded this country out of over $287 million in just the last 5 years alone. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, right this very moment in the state of Minnesota, there are right around 80,000 Somalian immigrants, many of whom have entered the country over the last 20 years as refugees. That said, right now, there are also right around 700 Somalian immigrants with TPS status, temporarily protected status, which was given to them by the Biden administration after, I kid you not, they illegally invaded our country. Now, before we go any further here, there's something very important that all of you need to understand. Let me try to explain how all of this really works. Somalians that have come into this country legally as refugees, as well as Somalians that have come into this country illegally and then been given TPS status, can both ultimately bring their families into the country as well through a process called chain migration. In fact, right around 30% of the Somalians in the country right now in total have entered the country through this chain migration process. And in case you haven't noticed, this entire situation has recently gotten completely out of control because, as it would turn out, Somalian immigrants have ended up becoming the single most criminally inclined demographic in the entire country. In just the last 5 years alone, attempting to defraud hundreds of millions of dollars out of the federal government. And by the way, I'm not joking when I say that. If you don't believe me, take a look at this. Somalian immigrants in Minnesota specifically have recently been caught orchestrating over half a dozen fraud schemes, always aimed at targeting and taking advantage of taxpayer-funded relief programs that are designed really to support Americans who are down on their luck. In fact, as a total comprehensive breakdown here, there was the Willow Tree Educational Center scam, in which Somalians submitted $2.3 million worth of fake meal invoices to the government. There was the Evergreen grocery store scam, in which Somalians submitted $4.2 million worth of fake meal invoices to the government and attempted to launder money through foreign transfers back to Somalia. There was a fake construction site scam in which Somalians submitted $7 million worth of fake enrollment rosters and invoices to the government and engaged in chargeback wire fraud. There was the RAN Partners in Nutrition scam in which Somalians once again submitted over $10 million worth of fake meal invoices to the government and then laundered the funds back to Somalia. And then, most recently, there was the Owned Smart Therapy scam, in which a group of Somalians lied about non-existent therapy sessions in which they diagnosed non-existent people with non-existent autism, ultimately trying to scam tens of millions of dollars out of the federal government. In fact, for some more information on this case specifically, just because it's so repulsive and disgusting, take a look at this.
A new, stunning report from the City Journal showing a massive fraud scheme in Minnesota. You have to hear about this. It involves false autism claims, the Somali community, and connections to a terror group. Let's explain over at The Wall. Now, it all revolves around Autism and HSS program. That is Minnesota's Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services. Now, this was created to help seniors, addicts, and others find housing, but the criteria to enter this program was incredibly loose and therefore easy to take advantage of. It's led to fraud and costs absolutely exploding. Just 5 years ago, in 2020, costs for this program were $2.6 million. 4 years later, by 2024, cost had been over $100 million, 104. Through the first 6 months of this year, costs are at $61 million, meaning if you double that over the entirety of the year, you're looking at $122 million. In 5 years, from $2 million to $122 million. Now, why? 6 people are accused of defrauding HSS, and they're members of the Somali community. But this just gets worse if we take a look at Minnesota's federally funded autism program. Now, several people, and this is an example, a woman in the Somali community, are co-conspirators, and they're accused of recruiting kids for autism therapy. They brought in families, had them convinced to get their kids diagnosed as autistic. In fact, these families ultimately ended up having various social services bid for their children, competing with the size of check that they would get. It didn't matter if the kids had autism. And what happened? Autism claims to Medicaid surged. In 2018, $3 million. By 2023, listen here, from $3 million to $400 million. Autism providers jumped from 41 to 328 in 5 years. Now, City Journal reports that the Somali fraud rings send a lot of money back to Somalia. 40% of households in Somalia get remittances from abroad. That totals $1.7 billion. That is more than the entire budget of the Somali government. Money being sent abroad, from abroad, back to Somalia. Where is that money going? Take a look at this. Most alarmingly, a lot of that money is funneled through money traders, and in the end, ends up in the hands of al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab. So to bring this full circle, the Minnesota taxpayers are funneling money through fraudulent autism claims back to Somalia, where that money lands in the accounts of Al-Shabaab.
So yeah, folks, let's really break all of this down. A group of Somalian immigrants living here in the United States of America opened up a bunch of fake mental health clinics, then forged a bunch of fraudulent autism diagnoses so they could defraud the federal government. Then they sent much of that money back to Africa to fund radical jihadi terror groups. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't make this up. This is the United States of America in the Lord's year of 2025. Now, luckily, like I said earlier, President Trump has decided to take direct action. In fact, late last night, President Trump posted this on Truth Social. Minnesota, under Governor Walz, is a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. I am, as President of the United States, hereby terminating, effective immediately, the temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota. Somali gangs are terrorizing the people of that great state, and billions of dollars are missing. Send them back to where they came from. It's over. You hear that, folks? Send them back to where they came from. Now that is a message that I can get behind. But of course, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who still doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman, had this to say. It's not surprising that the president has chosen to broadly target an entire community. This is what he does when he wants to change the subject. And so, folks, you know what? Here's my personal message to Governor Tim Walz. This community of Somalian scammers, thieves, and illegal immigrants absolutely should be legally targeted. Their crimes should be stopped, they should be held criminally accountable, and if possible, they should be deported. And the reason why is because they have been predaciously targeting Americans for years now, taking advantage of our hospitality and goodwill. Imagine being a Somalian immigrant and getting refugee status here in the United States of America. You've literally hit the jackpot. But instead of being appreciative and respectful, working to assimilate and become a productive member of our society, instead, you stab a knife into the back of the very country that offered you a helping hand, working tirelessly to defraud all of us hardworking, gracious American taxpayers. So you know what? If I can be honest here, ripping away their TPS, their protected status, isn't even going far enough. They've collectively been taking millions of dollars worth of federal aid money and lying about feeding starving American children. They've been giving that money to radical jihadi groups back in Africa, and they've been lying about taking care of American children with autism. As far as I'm concerned, these are lines that cannot be crossed. We cannot tolerate this. Frankly, the level of deep spiritual decay that has compelled these Somalian immigrants to engage in this evil behavior cannot be tolerated. So you know what? I'm with President Trump. I hope he deports every single one of them, because I'll tell you what, that is what it's going to take to put America first.